It's a beautiful spring morning. I'm in Newton County, Missouri. Hi, I'm Jim Viebrock. I spent the last 30 years out going around photographing, documenting, and now videoing old water mills. This is Jolly Mill. Let's take a look around.
It's early morning here at Jolly Mill, and Bob Haskins, the senior millwright, along with his son, grandson, and with the help of a host of other valuable volunteers, are preparing the mill to grind some corn later in this video. Mr. Haskins is just one of a long list of the Haskin family members that have been running this mill almost consistently since the family bought the mill in 1912. Built in 1848, mills like this require a lot of regular maintenance and adjustments. While the crew makes sure every bearing and gear is ready to go, let's talk about some of the other features of Jolly Mill Park.
Jolly Mill was built in 1848. It was purchased by the Haskins family in about 1910, and it operated through the Haskins family all the way up until 1973. During its time, they ground corn here, they ground flour here, and at one point was even being used as a distillery. This has a long, rich history for the Haskins family, and it's a great mill to come look at. This park here is beautiful. The Jolly Mill Park has other things to do besides just the mill. There is a side creek over here that my kids used to come and catch crawdads in when they were growing up. There's also a sawmill here. There's a couple of old one-room schoolhouses and churches here. There's an entire park of things to come look at. It's a great way to come spend a beautiful day.
Let's talk about the mill dam for a moment. Not only are they beautiful and oftentimes the focal point of the outside of the mill, but the dam also serves a very important role in the overall operation. The dam is the battery, so to speak, for the mill. The purpose of the dam is to create the mill pond, which backs up enough water in a reservoir to operate the mill for extended periods of time and during low water events. This is Capps Creek, and it's a beautiful place to explore.
We have to get the water from the mill pond into the mill. That's accomplished through a thing called either a race, a chase, or a sluice. In this application, this is a race. This is the catch basin for the water, and it goes in under the mill directly. Right inside the mill there is going to be a turbine down at the bottom of this catch basin here, this shaft of water. Turbines work off of static water pressure. The more water you can have above them, the heavier the water is, and the more force it's going to have going down through the turbine. This is a very efficient way of operating this mill. And when they open that turbine, this mill comes to life very smoothly. This is what I think is one of the best examples of how a turbine ought to be used. Let's talk about the millwright for a moment. The millwright is the person who owned or operated the mill. Most certainly is the person who took care of the equipment inside. Let's talk about how that individual made a living. He would share his services with the farmer. Now, the farmer would bring the product to town, and it would be either corn or wheat. The farmer might pay the millwright directly to grind it into feed for the livestock or for their own use. But most of the time, the millwright exchanged part of the crop for the services rendered. And this was a great situation for both the farmer and the millwright. The farmer didn't have to pay cash to get the product milled. He just had to provide some of it or share some of it with the millwright. And this was great for the millwright because he then had product that he could sell to the town folks throughout the year, be it cornmeal or grits or just feed for livestock. So this was a great situation for both the farmer and the millwright. Now, the process is really pretty simple. They would bring in a dry ear of corn, let's say, for an example, and it's still on the cob. So you've got to get the kernel off of the cob. And there's a machine called a corn sheller. It's a pretty basic machine. They put the ear of corn in the top. It very efficiently pulls the dry corn kernel off of the cob, and then it's ready to be cleaned. They take the kernels and run them through a shaker with a fan, and that cleans all of the debris and all of the chaff off of the corn kernels, which is now ready to be milled. Now there's three basic mills that you could use. You could use a stone mill like this mill has, and those come in two forms, either a horizontal stone mill or a vertical stone mill. You could have also used a roller mill. Roller mills came about after the turn of the 1900s, and they used two steel drums rolling against each other to pulverize the corn down to whatever size you want. And then they have a thing called a burr mill, which uses steel plates to grind the corn. Any of those were very efficient in what they were doing. They just came about in different points of time in history. Once the product was done, it was bagged, and then it either went home with the farmer or it stayed in the mill to be sold to the local town folk. Now, it was a big deal for the farmer to come to town. Not only was the corn getting grind, but they would get their haircuts, they would go to the local mercantiles, and they would restock their provisions. They didn't come to town every day like you and I do. It was a big event for the farmer to come to town, and the entire family most likely came with them.
While the penstock is filling with water, lead millwright Bob Haskins and his crew are preparing the mill for grinding corn later in this video. In the meantime, let's continue looking around the Jolly Mill Park.
It's not uncommon to find a millstone on display at a mill like this, and this one's a little unusual because it's actually a modular stone. About every fourth line or so, you can see where the stone is broke apart into sections. So it would have been easier to ship this stone, and it would have been easier to handle this stone simply because the pieces are not as heavy. Some of the bigger millstones can weigh over a ton on each side, so they're very heavy and very difficult to deal with. So this was kind of an ingenious way of dealing with the weight of the stone. Now these lines on here have to be recut from time to time. As the stones wear down, they have to reface the stone and cut those grooves. Well, how those grooves work is there's what rolls the corn kernels around or the wheat kernels around in there until it finally gets pulverized down to the size that you want it. These are cool to look at, and I like to show them off. There's a group of folks called the Friends of Jolly Mill, and they're the ones who have taken on the responsibility of preserving this great mill. One of the things that they have done that I really like is this protective wall. Not only is it attractive to look at, but this concrete barrier will keep the mill safe during a high water event. One of the things that plagues mills throughout history is the floods that have been affecting them. So in a valley like this, which is beautiful and peaceful today, can turn into a raging river in a high flood event. Debris will come downstream and strike the mill. And if you think about it, a large tree will float. So you could have a tree that weighs a ton or more striking the side of this stick frame building, which would just obliterate the building and push everything downstream. So the protection that this barrier provides is a great insurance policy against this mill being destroyed by a high water event. One of the things that I love about shooting these videos is that I get to hang out in some absolutely beautiful locations for a day. This mill is an original mill, and it is a very rare find. Inside you will find post and beam construction, hand-hewn logs, and things of that nature from this time period, and it is in great condition. We talked about how flooding was an issue for a lot of these mills because of their geographical location. But what you'll also find out when you study the history of a lot of these mills is that they burned, either intentionally or non-intentionally. The mills that were burned intentionally were burned during the Civil War. And in this part of the country that I'm in right now, there's this belt right through southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, where the Civil War was raging on. And the mills were the economic center and the food supply center for the locations where they sat. So when one side or the other was being pushed out of an area in a retreat scenario, they would actually set these mills on fire to keep them from falling into the hands of the other side. This was important because if whichever side had control over it had the food reserves and had control of the economy for the area where the mill sat. So it's easy to see why they did this, and it is a tragedy in our American history. But if you go to other places around the country, like the New England states, for example, you still find that mills throughout their history burned. And if you look at what's happening inside the mill, it's easy to explain why. Modern day pellet stoves, some of them run off of corn kernels. So what you may not realize is that corn, dried corn, is highly flammable. In a building like this, you would have had hundreds and hundreds of bags of processed corn or dried corn waiting to be processed, sitting in storage inside the mill. Also, as the product is being ground, as the corn is being processed, you have dust filling the air of these mills. That dust is explosive. So you can imagine a mill like Jolly Mill that has cast iron gears in it working against each other. Metal on metal creates sparks. So it's not uncommon for a mill like this to just simply have a flash fire, and then with all of the dry corn sitting here in storage, goes up like a match. It is a tragedy, but it is part of the history of many of these mills.
A small group of people have gathered inside, so let's join senior millwright Bob Haskins as he explains his favorite parts of the mill.
Reason I start here, folks, is I like to start talking about the structure of the mill itself, because all I can about say is wow. Does anybody notice anything about these beams, these vertical beams? These beams are hand-hewn octagonal. The structure itself is just amazing. Amazing how much time and effort put into all these. These are all hand-hewn. For you kids, what that is they used an adze, not axe, adze. They had broad adze. They went this way, or they stood over them like this. And that's why all them are all adze marks. Kind of amazing, isn't it? The work that went into this. There's 200, I counted one day, there's 200 beams just in this bottom floor. These are all mortise and tenon joints with wooden pegs, all handmade. And just think about going up there on that hill, cutting these with a crosscut saw, skidding them down here with horses, then getting them to the shape with adze, with the adze, and then building this thing.
It looks like the crew has the mill ready to go, so let's start grinding some corn.
I hope you've enjoyed our tour of Jolly Mill. I'm Jim Viebrock. Let's go find another mill to explore.